My eyes flew open to a sharp, metallic tang in the air, like the scent of blood. The soft morning light seeping through my curtains carried an odd, reddish hue, and for a fleeting moment, I thought I might still be dreaming. But the heaviness in the air was unmistakable, sticky and oppressive, like trying to breathe through damp, heated fabric. It wasn't long before my attention locked onto my walls, and dread clawed its way up my spine. Where pristine white paint had been just hours before, something grotesque had taken its place. The walls seemed alive, shimmering with a slick, fleshy sheen that resembled the inside of a mouth turned outward. Thin veins and darker capillaries crisscrossed the surface like tributaries on a grotesque map, pulsing faintly with a liquid that definitely wasn't blood. In some spots, the tissue folded and puckered into fleshy nodules that quivered in time with the rhythmic throbbing. When I hesitantly reached out to touch it, the wall radiated feverish heat. It gave way under my fingertips, pliant and disturbingly soft, like pressing into raw meat. Worse, it twitched at my touch. Gasping, I jerked my hand back. A shallow indentation formed where I'd touched, and it slowly filled with a clear, viscous fluid that trickled down like a tear. Panic surged through me as my gaze darted to the door, except it wasn't my door anymore. The wooden frame I'd walked through 1,000 times had been replaced by something alive. It resembled a gaping sphincter, its edges framed with wet, cartilage-like ridges. Along the rim, small, tooth-like protrusions flexed and curled, eerily reminiscent of sea anemone tentacles. "Jake?" I called, my voice shaky and uncertain. "Jake, are you there?" The faint clatter of dishes from the kitchen drifted through the air, and for a brief moment, relief washed over me. Jake was here. He was okay. Whatever this was, he'd help me figure it out. My hand instinctively reached for my phone on the nightstand, but when I looked at the screen, my stomach dropped. Instead of the usual display, the surface of the phone pulsed, mimicking the living tissue surrounding me. Pushing through the grotesque doorway took every ounce of willpower I had. The opening contracted slightly as I moved through it, the fleshy edges brushing against my skin with a damp, unsettling touch. The hallway was no better, it felt like stepping into a living organism. The walls shifted with a slow, undulating rhythm, like the inside of some massive creature's throat. The carpet had transformed into a dense layer of hair-like cilia, which bent beneath my steps, glowing faintly as if reacting to my movements. Each breath grew heavier, the air thickening with moisture as an ominous sound filled the space. From within the pulsing walls came wet, arrhythmic thuds, a chorus of mismatched heartbeats, pounding in dreadful unison. The framed photos along the walls still hung in their usual spots, but something about them had twisted in a way that made my stomach lurch. The faces were no longer recognizable, they stretched unnaturally, their features warped like reflections in a funhouse mirror. Where eyes should have been, there were now gaping, black voids that seemed to stare right through me. My breath caught as I noticed one of the figures in a photo, Jake's face from our beach trip, slowly turning to meet my gaze. I stumbled into the kitchen and saw him there, standing by the counter with his back turned to me. He was moving with a cold, unsettling precision, taking what looked like plates from the cabinet and placing them on the counter. Over and over, the motion repeated. But when I looked closer, I realized those weren't plates. They were curved, bone-white shards, sections of actual bone, thin and polished to a sickening gleam. "Jake?" My voice cracked, trembling with both fear and hope. "Oh, thank God. You're here. Something's happening to the apartment, we have to leave, right now." He turned to face me, and I felt the world tilt beneath my feet. His movements were stiff, jerky, as if some unseen force was yanking him along like a marionette. His face was a grotesque parody of itself, his familiar smile stretched far too wide, revealing rows upon rows of jagged teeth like those of a shark. Black, oily liquid oozed from the corners of his eyes, spilling down his cheeks in thick, tar-like streams. His skin glistened with the same slimy texture as the walls, and beneath the surface, something wriggled and shifted, alive and inhuman. Morning, "Darling," he said, his voice garbled and wet, each word bubbling as dark fluid seeped from the corners of his mouth. "Just setting up for breakfast. The apartment, it's starving, you see. And guess what?" He tilted his head in a disturbingly unnatural angle, his too many teeth smile growing wider. "You're the main course." His arms reached for me, and I stumbled back, horrified. His fingers bent in impossible ways, joints multiplying where they shouldn't exist. I could feel the walls behind me trembling, pulsing in anticipation. "Don't worry," he gurgled, stepping closer. "The process of being absorbed. It only hurts until there's no more you left." A slick, wet sound came from behind me, and I whipped around to see the only exit sealing itself shut. The flesh-like doorway twisted and fused, knitting together as if the apartment was alive and determined to keep me inside. The walls began to pulsate violently, their rhythm picking up like a heartbeat in overdrive. Somewhere deep within the living tissue surrounding me, a low, sickening gurgle echoed, a sound that could only mean one thing. The apartment was starting to feed.